The Empress of a million systems stood before the panoramic crystal of her flagship's observation deck, her silhouette a cutout against the tapestry of stars and the amber glow of the gas giant below. Her daughter, the princess, stood a respectful pace behind, her hands clasped, her youthful face a careful mirror of her mother's serene authority. "They are a curious species," the Empress said, her voice a melody of absolute power. She gestured with a chin of polished cerulean bone toward the main viewer, where a fleet of blocky, utilitarian human vessels held formation. They build their ships like bricks, their weapons with no art. They have no natural armor, no venom, no psychic shimmer. Yet they persist. They even volunteered for this flank guard duty. A polite fiction, of course. Our sentinels will bear the brunt of the Devourer swarm. The princess observed the human ships. They were ugly, she thought. All hard angles and gray metal, lacking the flowing, organic lines of the imperial warships that glistened like raptors beside them. "Why do they bother, Mother?" the princess asked. "Their presence is symbolic at best." A gesture from a minor ally. The Empress turned, her multifaceted eyes capturing the starlight. "It is the question that defines a people, my child. Not what can you destroy, but what will you guard? I asked their Commodore this very thing. Why take this lonely, dangerous watch? Do you know what he said?" The princess waited. He said, "It's the job." A profoundly simple answer. Almost empty. The Empress smiled, a thin curve of lips. "But tonight we shall see the truth of it. The Devourers come. Watch these humans, daughter. Learn what emptiness truly holds." Alarms began to chime, soft and harmonic at first, then rising in urgency. On the tactical displays, the edge of the system dissolved into a crawling, chaotic blur as the Devourer swarm translated into real space. They were a biological tide, each vessel a chitinous horror, moving with a terrible synchronicity that bypassed communication. A shared mind driving them toward the heart of the Empire. The Imperial fleet moved with glorious precision. Waves of crystalline fighters erupted from launch bays, their energy lances drawing brilliant lines of death across the dark. The great sentinels, the pride of the Empire, activated their void shields, shimmering domes of force that unraveled Devourer projectiles and scorched the leading edge of the swarm. The human fleet, stationed on the far left flank, seemed to hesitate for a moment. Their ships were slower to turn, their formations less elegant. "See?" the Empress noted, a trace of disappointment in her voice. "They are reactive. They lack the instinct for the dance of war." Then the Devourer swarm did what it always did. It adapted. A massive tendril of the swarm, sacrificing thousands of units, wrapped around the lead sentinel. Instead of attacking its shields, they detonated in a cascade of bioplasmic fury, overloading the frequency. The great ship's shield flickered and died. Instantly, 100 smaller Devourer forms latched onto its hull. Beginning their corrosive work, the Imperial command channel erupted with tactical adjustments, orders to reinforce, to reposition. But the swarm was pushing, its main force now threatening to bypass the Imperial line entirely, heading straight for the flagship. For the Empress herself, it was then the human fleet moved. Not to retreat, not to hold their polite, symbolic line, they advanced. They drove their brick-like vessels directly into the path of the bypassing swarm. There was no elegance to it, no brilliant energy shows. It was a brutal, physical interception. Their forward ships simply rammed into the Devourer vanguard, their reinforced hulls grinding chitin and metal into a cloud of debris. "What are they doing?" a princess whispered, leaning forward. "They will be overwhelmed." The human Commodore's voice crackled over the open alliance channel, calm and gravelly. "Imperial flagship, this is flank guard. The hole in your line is ours to fill. Suggest you regroup behind our position." The Empress was silent, her eyes fixed on the viewer. The human ships formed no shield dome. They created a wall of steel and projectile fire. Their weapons were not lances or beams, but mass drivers hurling solid slugs at relativistic speeds, and missiles that proliferated into clouds of shrapnel. It was messy, violent, and devastatingly effective against the tightly packed biological forms. The void filled with frozen viscera and shattered carapaces. But the Devourers were endless. They washed against the human wall, and the wall began to crumble. A human cruiser, its name translated simply as bulwark, was swarmed. Its point defense guns fired until they glowed white-hot, then fell silent. The Devourers covered it, a living sheath, and it vanished from the tactical plot. Another. The Sentinel, the human irony was not lost on the Princess, detonated its own reactor core as it was boarded, taking a quarter of the swarm's sub-command cluster with it. The humans did not yield. They closed ranks. Ships damaged beyond any Imperial captain's tolerance to consider still fired, using maneuvering thrusters to keep their main batteries bearing on the enemy. A frigate, its forward section open to vacuum, drifted sideways into the path of a Devourer spore burst. Shielding a more heavily armed companion, the Princess watched, her earlier disdain replaced by a cold, rising awe. This was not a dance. This was a brawl. This was standing in a doorway and refusing to move, no matter how many blows rained down. Their shields are weak. Their armor is failing. Why do they not withdraw? The Princess asked, her voice tight. The Empress said nothing. She was listening to the human command channel, which she had patched to a private feed. It was not the Commodore's voice she heard now, but the voices of the humans themselves. A human on a ship whose oxygen was failing, singing a rough, steady song to a comrade. A gunner on a vessel losing pressure, refusing to leave her post, her breaths coming in ragged, determined gasps as she fired shot after shot. An engineer, his leg pinned under a fallen beam, calmly directing a repair team over the intercom until his voice faded. They spoke of home, of places with green grass and blue seas. They spoke of family. They used words like duty and hold the line and not on my watch. Simple words. Empty words, she had thought. The human flagship, a battered behemoth called the Vigil, now stood alone before the last push that would breach the line. It was venting atmosphere from a dozen wounds, its engines dead. The Imperial fleet, having reformed, was now ready to strike the weakened swarm from the rear. But they needed minutes. The Vigil had to buy those minutes. The Devourer swarm coalesced for a final, crushing surge. On the open channel, the human Commodore spoke again, his voice crackling with static. "Flagship, this is Vigil. We are at anchor. Primary systems are offline. We are loading final canister shot to port batteries. We will hold this position." It was not a boast. It was a report. The Empress opened a direct line. "Commodore, you have done enough. Your sacrifice is noted. You may stand down." The reply was immediate. "Respectfully, Your Majesty, we cannot. The job's not finished." The swarm hit the Vigil. The view was swallowed by a storm of lightning and debris. When it cleared, the Vigil was still there, broken, silent, but physically blocking the corridor of advance. Its final act had been to flood its own superstructure with cryogenic coolant, flash freezing the hundreds of Devourers attached to it into a single, grotesque monument of ice and metal, a makeshift barricade in the void. The path was blocked. The minutes were bought. With a glorious and terrible fury, the full might of the Imperial fleet fell upon the stalled Devourer swarm from behind and flank. It was a victory, decisive and absolute. On the observation deck, the silence was profound. The gas giant turned below, indifferent. The stars shone on. The princess looked at the field of wreckage, the beautiful, mangled hulks of Imperial sentinels, and amongst them the shattered bricks of the human fleet. One ship, the smallest class, limped on thrusters toward a gathering point, its hull blackened and torn. She felt a tremor in her soul. She had seen strength in the Imperial might, a sharp and brilliant sword. But she had seen a different strength in the humans. The strength of the wall, the strength of the shield. Her mother, the Empress, turned from the crystal. The serene mask was gone. In its place was a look of weary, profound understanding. "You asked why they bother," the Empress said softly. "Now you see. I asked the Commodore who guards us through the night. He gave me a simple answer. Tonight, he gave me the true one." The princess looked at her mother, then back at the wreck of the vigil. "They do," she whispered. The Empress placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Yes, they guard. It is not their technology. It is not their art. It is their choice. They see a thing that must be done, a line that must be held, and they plant their feet. They guard their own. And tonight, they chose to guard us." The princess understood now. The emptiness was not in the human simple words. The emptiness was in the space before their line. An emptiness they filled with their will, their bodies, their ships. They were not the dazzling sword of the Empire. They were the shield, unadorned, unyielding. "So who guards you through the night?" The Empress asked once more, the question now a lesson. The princess looked at the last human ship, a tiny, stubborn light among the stars. Her voice was clear and sure.